ben Yosef, more widely remembered simply as Rabbi Akiva, stands as one of the most luminous figures in the history of Judaism, a sage whose life, teachings, and martyrdom came to embody both the resilience and the depth of the Jewish spirit in an age of turbulence and transformation. And though he lived nearly 2 millennia ago, the outlines of his biography, colored by legend, hagiography, and historical record, Akiva continues to inspire reflection on the capacity of human beings to rise from obscurity into greatness through perseverance, faith, and love of the divine law. Born in the 1st century of the Common Era, around the year 50, in or near the town of Lod in Judea, Akiva's early life was marked by simplicity and anonymity, for tradition relates that he was the son of Yosef, possibly a convert to Judaism, and that in his youth he was utterly unlearned in Torah. He was even considered an adherence, a man of the land, unschooled and rough, who worked as a shepherd tending the flocks of one of the wealthiest men of Jerusalem, a landowner named Ben Kalbasaba. In these humble beginnings lies the first of many paradoxes in his life, that the man who would one day be called the chief of the sages. His interpretive genius would become a cornerstone of rabbinic tradition, began as one who could not even read the Hebrew letters, one who carried in his heart a resentment towards scholars and who, according to tradition, once declared that if given the chance he would bite a rabbi as fiercely as a donkey bites and breaks bones. Yet within this seemingly unpromising vessel there lay the spark of transformation, waiting only for the right conditions to ignite. The pivotal catalyst for this transformation came in the figure of Rachel, the daughter of his wealthy employer. Rachel, whose name echoes the biblical matriarch, and whose qualities of vision and faith were no less momentous, looked beyond the rough exterior of the shepherd and perceived within him the potential for greatness. Tradition records that she told Akiva she would marry him on one condition, that he dedicate himself to Torah study. Her father, outraged at the match between his daughter and an ignorant shepherd, disowned her and cast her out of his household, but Rachel, steadfast in her conviction, accepted a life of poverty and hardship to support her husband's new path. The couple lived in a hayloft, so destitute that straw served as their bedding, and yet their bond was strong enough to sustain the sacrifices required for Akiva to begin a life of learning at an age when most men of his era were long established in their trades. Inspired by the sight of water dripping upon stone and wearing it down over time, Akiva resolved that if water, though soft, could carve stone through persistence, then Torah, the word of God, could engrave wisdom upon the heart, no matter how hardened or untutored. Thus at the age of 40 he began to learn the alphabet alongside children, and from that humble beginning he ascended step by painstaking step toward mastery. The story of his early studies is filled with both hardship and miracles. He studied first under teachers such as Rabbi Eliezer ben Hyrcanus and Rabbi Joshua ben Hananiah, absorbing the traditions of the elders with extraordinary dedication, and then under Rabbi Tarfon. He would often absent himself from home for long periods, once for 12 years of continuous study, returning with a following of students so great that Rachel herself had to remind him of her role in his transformation, declaring before them all that the Torah which they had gained through his teaching was hers as well. In this way, his personal story was always entwined with hers, and Jewish tradition has never ceased to honor her faith and sacrifices inseparable from his greatness. When later his estranged father-in-law sought reconciliation and offered him wealth, Akiva was no longer the impoverished shepherd, but a recognized sage, and the marriage was vindicated. From these beginnings, Rabbi Akiva rose to become one of the preeminent teachers of his age. A generation marked by the trauma of the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE and the subsequent reconstitution of Jewish religious life around Torah study, prayer, and communal structures rather than sacrificial worship. In this new world, the oral tradition and the authority of the sages took on unprecedented importance, and Akiva became one of the chief architects of this transformation. He gathered around him a vast circle of disciples, later said to number 24,000, who spread across Judea and beyond, disseminating his teachings and interpretations. Among his most famous disciples were Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, Rabbi Yos, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Nehemiah, names that echo throughout the Mishnah and Midrash. His academy in Bnei Brak became a fountain of Torah study, and the gatherings of sages there are recorded in the Passover Haggadah, where they are described as having spent the entire night recounting the Exodus until their students came to tell them it was time for the morning Shema. Rabbi Akiva's intellectual legacy lay especially in his hermeneutical method. While earlier sages had relied on interpretive principles transmitted from Sinai, Akiva expanded the scope of exegesis to include even the smallest particles of the text. He declared that every word, every letter, every repetition, and even the decorative crowns, tagged upon the letters of the Torah had meaning and purpose, placed there by divine intention and awaiting discovery. From these details he derived laws, ethical teachings, and mystical insights, creating a framework in which the Torah was not merely a static text, but a living, inexhaustible wellspring of meaning. The Talmud relates that Moses himself, in a vision, once saw God affixing crowns to the letters and asked for whom this was done, and God replied that in the future a man named Akiva would derive mountains of laws from each crown. In this way, Akiva became the model of infinite interpretive possibility, suggesting that no matter how much one learns, the Torah always contains more within its depths. Alongside his legal innovations, Rabbi Akiva was also a master of ethical teaching. He declared that the greatest principle of the Torah is the verse, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself," elevating interpersonal ethics to the center of Jewish spirituality. In this he differed from his contemporary Ben Azai, who argued that the most fundamental principle was the verse, "This is the book of the generations of Adam," affirming the universal dignity of all humanity. But Akiva's emphasis on love as the guiding force of all commandments left an indelible mark on Jewish moral consciousness. He also counseled humility, patience, and perseverance, teaching that all is foreseen, but freedom of choice is given, and that all of one's actions are recorded for judgment. He rejected the casual use of capital punishment, declaring that a Sanhedrin which executed once in 70 years was considered destructive, though paradoxically, he also insisted upon strict fidelity to legal reasoning, saying, "There is no pity in judgment." Thus, his teaching balanced compassion with rigor, never allowing either to eclipse the other. Rabbi Akiva's life was not merely one of study, but also of profound faith, a faith so radical that it transformed how later generations understood suffering, resilience, and hope. When denied lodging in a village and forced to sleep outdoors, he accepted each loss, the extinguishing of his lamp, the death of his rooster, the theft of his donkey, with equanimity, saying all that God does is for the good. When the next morning revealed that raiders had struck the village, leaving him unharmed precisely because he was outside it and unnoticed, his faith was vindicated. When he and his colleagues once viewed the ruins of the destroyed temple and his companions wept, Akiva laughed, explaining that the fulfillment of prophecies of destruction gave him assurance that the prophecies of redemption would likewise be fulfilled. In this way, he embodied an orientation toward reality in which tragedy itself became a vehicle for hope. Rabbi Akiva's role in Jewish history was not confined to the academy or the Beit Midrash. It extended into the political and messianic yearnings of his people in one of the most turbulent eras of Roman rule over Judea. In the wake of the destruction of the Second Temple, Jewish life was disoriented, many communities scattered, and the question of identity loomed. How could a people defined by temple and sacrifice continue to revive without its spiritual heart? Rabbi Akiva became one of the central figures in reorienting Judaism toward Torah study, prayer, and mitzvot as the foundation of communal continuity, yet he also embodied the passionate national longing for redemption and renewal of sovereignty. This longing reached a peak in the revolt of Simon Bar Kokhba, later called Bar Kokhba, around the year 132 CE. Rabbi Akiva, discerning in him qualities of leadership and strength, declared him to be the messianic king, citing the verse, "A star shall go forth from Jacob," and interpreting Bar Kokhba's very name, meaning son of a star, as an omen of divine destiny. In this, Akiva revealed the depth of his hope for Israel's liberation and the re-establishment of the temple service, aligning his spiritual authority with the aspirations of a generation battered by Roman oppression. Though history would prove the revolt a catastrophic failure, leading to immense loss of life and further exile, Akiva's support for Bar Kokhba demonstrated his unwillingness to separate Torah from the living destiny of the Jewish people. His belief that the covenant demanded not passive waiting but active striving. Yet his faith in the future was matched by his capacity for mystical vision. Tradition tells of the four sages who entered Paradis, the orchard of esoteric wisdom, a symbolic journey into the inner mysteries of the divine. One entered and died, one went mad, one became a heretic, but Akiva entered in peace and departed in peace. This tale conveys that his balance of intellect, humility, and spiritual discipline enabled him to penetrate the highest mysteries without losing his grounding in the world of halakha and community. He was thus remembered as one who could hold together the rational and the mystical, the earthly and the transcendent, and in this way became an exemplar for later generations of mystics who sought to unite devotion with reason. Another mystical association ascribed to him is the composition or preservation of the Kaddish prayer, a doxology that sanctifies God's name not by speaking of death but by magnifying divine greatness even in moments of grief. Whether or not he was its author, the linkage expresses how Akiva embodied the power to affirm life and faith even when the world seemed shattered. The tragic end of his life has become one of the most enduring stories of Jewish martyrdom. When the Romans, after the Bar Kokhba revolt, issued decrees against Torah study, Akiva defied the prohibition and continued to gather students, declaring that Torah is life itself, and just as fish cannot live outside water, so Jews cannot live without Torah. For this he was arrested, imprisoned, and eventually executed. The Talmud describes how he was tortured with iron combs tearing his flesh, and yet at that very moment he recited the Shema, prolonging the word Echad, one, as his soul departed, testifying with his final breath to the unity of God. His students, horrified, asked how he could maintain such devotion under such agony, and he replied that all his life he had wondered when he might fulfill the commandment to love God with all his soul. Now that the opportunity had come, he embraced it. In this image, Rabbi Akiva's life culminated in a testimony that transcends death, his martyrdom becoming a source of inspiration across centuries, remembered among the 10 martyrs recited in Yom Kippur liturgy and in elegies of Jewish suffering. His death was not the extinguishing of his legacy but its eternal sealing. To appreciate the breadth of Akiva's influence, one must consider how his teachings saturate rabbinic literature. He appears more than 1,000 times in the Mishnah, Tosefta, and both Talmuds, not as a distant authority but as a constant participant in debates that shaped Jewish law. He argued cases of ritual purity and impurity, the laws of marriage and divorce, the minutiae of vows, the boundaries of Sabbath observance, the principles of damages and torts. His rulings often leaned toward leniency in family law, protecting the vulnerable, while upholding rigor in public or ritual matters where communal sanctity was at stake. His hermeneutical rules provided tools by which later generations compiled the halakhic midrashim, such as the Sifra on Leviticus, much of which is attributed to his school. It was his intellectual system that enabled Rabbi Yehuda HaNazi, his spiritual grandson through discipleship, to codify the Mishnah in the early 3rd century. Without Akiva's innovations, rabbinic Judaism as a coherent system might not have crystallized in the form that carried the Jewish people through centuries of dispersion. His personality emerges in countless anecdotes that blend humor, humility, and sharpness of mind. When asked why Israel was likened to fish and Torah to water, he explained that just as fish cannot survive outside the sea, so Jews cannot survive without Torah. When mocked for beginning study late in life, he pointed to the power of water to wear away stone. When confronted with scoffers, he turned their barbs into parables of resilience. In his marriage, he exemplified gratitude, for when his students once attempted to push away Rachel in their zeal, he declared, "All that is mine, and all that is yours is hers," acknowledging that his entire legacy was made possible by her sacrifice. In these stories, he becomes not only a sage of law, but a sage of the heart, whose greatness was inseparable from his humanity. Rabbi Akiva also helped shape the Jewish calendar and liturgy. His rulings on which books were to be included in the canon contributed to the acceptance of Song of Songs, Esther, and Ezekiel, texts that some had doubted but that he defended with passion. Of the Song of Songs, he declared that all the writings are holy, but the Song of Songs is the Holy of Holies, affirming the sanctity of human love as a metaphor for God. By elevating this text, he opened the way for Jewish mysticism to read human passion as a symbol of covenantal intimacy between God and Israel. His impact thus extended beyond law into poetry, beyond ritual into the deepest currents of spiritual imagination. The circle of disciples he left behind also testifies to his greatness. Rabbi Meir, a brilliant legalist and storyteller, carried forward Akiva's methods of exegesis. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, who according to later tradition became the transmitter of the Zohar, carried forward Akiva's mystical dimension. Rabbi Yehuda, later called the Prince, inherited the balance of law and compassion. Through them, Akiva's spirit was diffused into every corner of rabbinic Judaism, his ideas living not only in texts, but in the ethos of learning itself. And yet the memory of the tragedy of his 24,000 students who died in a plague endures, a cautionary tale that Torah without mutual respect cannot endure. The mourning customs of the Omer, observed to this day, keep alive both the loss and the lesson. What makes Rabbi Akiva's story especially enduring is its dramatic arc, from illiterate shepherd to towering sage, from despised outcast to national leader, from husband of a visionary woman to martyr whose last breath sanctified God. His life embodies the possibility of transformation at any stage, the marriage of perseverance and inspiration, the intertwining of law and love, the embrace of suffering as a gateway to redemption. Generations of Jews have looked to him as a model of what it means to devote oneself wholly to Torah while remaining fully engaged with the world, as a symbol of courage in the face of persecution, and as a teacher whose words continue to echo wherever Jews open a page of Talmud. Rabbi Akiva's approach to the Torah was not only one of rigorous analysis, but of profound reverence for its every syllable, and it is this dimension that established him as the father of the hermeneutic system later codified in halakhic midrash. Earlier traditions emphasized general interpretive rules, such as those of Rabbi Ishmael, which worked with principles of analogy, structure, and context. Akiva pressed further into the textual fabric itself, arguing that no word was redundant, no repetition superfluous, no particle meaningless. Where the Torah said et, a grammatical particle that in ordinary Hebrew has little content, Akiva sought additional meaning, often expanding the scope of the verse to include hidden cases or broader categories. Though at times his contemporaries pushed back, arguing that this approach risked overburdening the text with inferences, it was precisely this meticulous attentiveness that gave rise to new depths of halakhic detail. In this way, he anticipated the later rabbinic conviction that Torah is infinite, that even after generations of commentary it still contains treasures awaiting discovery. It was not only the content of his rulings but the very posture he modeled, an attitude of awe before the divine word, that became a central feature of rabbinic Judaism. His vision of Torah extended beyond the legal and exegetically into the existential. He believed that Torah study itself was an act of intimacy with the divine, that in reciting and interpreting words given at Sinai one participated in the ongoing revelation. For this reason, he was willing to risk his life under Roman persecution, continuing to teach publicly when forbidden. He understood Torah as life, not as an accessory to life but as its very essence. Thus when his students asked why he defied the decrees, he responded with the parable of the fish and the fox. A fox invited fish to leave the dangerous waters, where they were hunted by fishermen, and come dwell with him on dry land, but the fish replied that if they could not survive in their natural element, how much less could they survive out of it? So too, said Akiva, Jews cannot abandon Torah, for without it they are already dead. In this parable we glimpse the existential dimension of his teaching. Torah is not merely law, it is the atmosphere of Jewish being, inseparable from identity itself. The stories of his humility and perseverance have been told countless times, each retelling reinforcing the possibility of transformation. His beginning at age 40 has inspired generations who feared they were too old to learn. His poverty, endured with Rachel, has inspired those who sacrifice for a higher calling. His acknowledgement of Rachel's role has provided a model of marital partnership and gratitude rare in ancient texts. Indeed, Rachel is not only a supporting character, but in many ways the unsung co-architect of his destiny, for without her vision his path might never have begun. The Agadic stories ensure that his biography is never reduced to dry dates or doctrines, but remains a living narrative accessible to all who seek encouragement. Even in his legal strictness, Akiva displayed an undercurrent of compassion. While he insisted upon the rigorous application of halakhic reasoning, he also argued that human dignity is paramount. His interpretation of the principle "love your neighbor as yourself" as the great rule of Torah did not mean sentimentality, but a recognition that the purpose of the commandments is to cultivate mutual respect and care. He balanced this with realism, acknowledging that not every relationship is harmonious, but he insisted that the ethical heart of Torah cannot be neglected. His disputes with his colleagues, preserved in the Mishnah, reveal his intellectual sharpness, but also his willingness to concede when necessary. The image that emerges is of a man simultaneously firm and flexible, unyielding in devotion yet gentle in personal demeanor. The mystical tradition surrounding him is equally rich. The story of Pardes symbolizes not only his ability to survive esoteric vision but his capacity to integrate it. While others were consumed by the encounter with divine mysteries, Akiva returned to teach and lead, embodying the principle that mystical experience must flow back into communal life. His affirmation of Song of Songs as Holy of Holies suggests a mystical reading of love itself, opening the way for later Kabbalists to see erotic imagery as a metaphor for union with God. In this sense, Akiva was not merely a legalist but a proto-mystic, one who could glimpse the infinite without losing balance. Rabbi Akiva also demonstrated a remarkable capacity for hope even in the face of catastrophe. After the destruction of the temple, many despaired, but he taught that the prophecies of consolation were as certain as those of destruction. The story of his laughter at the sight of foxes roaming the ruins of the Holy of Holies exemplifies this. Where others saw only desecration, he saw the confirmation of prophecy, and thus the assurance of eventual redemption. His ability to reframe tragedy as a sign of hope reveals the psychological resilience that underpinned his leadership. He refused to allow despair to define Jewish existence. Instead, he transformed mourning into anticipation, exile into an arena of faith. The episode of his students' deaths further demonstrates his role as a moral teacher. The tradition that 24,000 disciples perished between Passover and Shavuot because they did not show proper respect for one another conveys a profound warning. That Torah without interpersonal ethics is hollow, and that scholarship divorced from humility leads to ruin. Though some historians interpret the number symbolically or link it to losses in the Bar Kokhba revolt, the rabbinic lesson is clear. Learning must be joined with love. From the ashes of that tragedy, Akiva rebuilt with a handful of new disciples who became the backbone of the Mishnah. His resilience in the face of such loss reveals his unbreakable commitment. When we turn to his martyrdom, we see the culmination of his life's themes. Arrested for teaching Torah, he responded not with silence, but with testimony. His recitation of the Shema at the moment of torture epitomizes his philosophy, that devotion to God is not contingent on circumstance but absolute. His words to his students, that he had long awaited the chance to fulfill loving God with all his soul, reveal a life lived in anticipation of ultimate fidelity. His death, therefore, was not an interruption of his mission, but its fulfillment, an act that transformed the commandment into lived reality. The memory of his martyrdom became a touchstone in Jewish liturgy and imagination, a symbol of unbroken faith. Even after his death, the structures he helped build sustained Jewish life. His method of interpretation became embedded in the schools of halakhic midrash. His disciples carried forward his teachings. His sayings, preserved in Pirkei Avot and scattered through the Talmud, continued to instruct. The canon of scripture he helped defend shaped Jewish spirituality. His support for Bar Kokhba, though historically tragic, demonstrated the enduring Jewish yearning for redemption, a yearning that would animate generations. Thus, Rabbi Akiva remained present in every aspect of Jewish tradition, his voice echoing whenever Jews wrestle with text, law, and faith. Rabbi Akiva's greatness was not only in his mastery of texts and his willingness to suffer martyrdom for the sake of Torah, but in the enduring synthesis he achieved between law, ethics, mysticism, and national hope, a synthesis that made him more than a sage of his generation. This elevated him into a paradigm for all future generations. The rabbis who came after him could scarcely imagine the world of Torah without Akiva's interpretive framework. His methods of reading and deriving law became foundational for the Mishnah and Talmud, and through them for all later halakhic discourse. His assertion that every jot and tittle of the Torah contained meaning was not simply an exegetically principle, but a worldview, one that proclaimed that the divine word was infinite, that revelation was not a closed book but an ever-unfolding reality in which each generation could participate. This vision allowed Judaism to endure the cataclysm of the temple's destruction, for it relocated the center of sanctity from a building of stone to the living words of Torah and the living community of learners. By showing that holiness resided in the smallest letters and crowns of Scripture, Akiva made holiness portable, resilient, and indestructible, carried in the hearts and mouths of Israel wherever they wandered. His hermeneutics also gave dignity to the individual learner. If every letter was significant, then every person's study was significant. If the Torah was inexhaustible, then every generation's commentary was indispensable. Akiva thus democratized learning, not by abolishing authority but by affirming that Torah study was not the preserve of priests or aristocrats but open to all who labored with sincerity. His own life embodied this democratization, for he had begun as an unlettered shepherd, despised as ignorant, and rose to become the master of masters. The message was clear: Torah is not the inheritance of the elite alone, but the treasure of all Israel, available to anyone who will sacrifice, persevere, and love. This democratizing impulse echoed through the centuries, inspiring countless Jews who might otherwise have despaired of their inadequacy to take up the task of study and discover in themselves new capacities. The ethical teachings of Rabbi Akiva were as transformative as his legal ones. His declaration that love your neighbor as yourself is the great principle of the Torah became one of the most famous rabbinic sayings, shaping Jewish ethics and resonating with universal appeal. He recognized that Torah, for all its complexity of laws, was at its core a path toward love and respect among human beings. This teaching has been cited for centuries as Judaism's central moral axiom, balancing ritual observance with ethical responsibility. At the same time, Akiva did not reduce the Torah to sentimentality. He held fast to the rigorous application of law, insisting that compassion must be grounded in structure. Yet he saw no contradiction between these poles, for in his vision, law itself was an expression of divine love, guiding human beings into harmony with one another and with God. His life's work demonstrates that the deepest piety is inseparable from the highest ethics, that devotion to God manifests most authentically in love of neighbor. Rabbi Akiva's relationship to Scripture was also canonical in the literal sense, for he was instrumental in defending the sanctity of texts that might otherwise have been excluded. He argued passionately for the inclusion of Song of Songs in the canon, insisting that its language of human love was not base but exalted, a parable of the love between God and Israel. In doing so, he affirmed that the spiritual life embraces the whole of human experience, even passion and desire, elevating them into symbols of covenantal intimacy. Similarly, he defended Esther and Ezekiel, ensuring that the canon reflected both historical deliverance and prophetic vision. In this role, Akiva helped shape the spiritual imagination of the Jewish people, securing for them texts that would inspire joy, hope, and mysticism across millennia. His defense of Song of Songs in particular opened a doorway for later Jewish mystics to read human eros as a symbol of divine union, a theme that would echo in Kabbalah and Hasidism, whose roots reach back to Akiva's bold affirmation that all the writings are holy. The Song of Songs is the holy of holies. The national dimension of his life remains complex, for his support of Bar Kokhba was both a testimony to his hope and a source of later debate. In recognizing Bar Kokhba as Messiah, Akiva revealed his readiness to see redemption not only as a distant promise, but as an imminent possibility, one that could be grasped through courage and struggle. Some later rabbis criticized this endorsement, noting the disaster that ensued when the revolt was crushed and Jerusalem devastated anew. Yet even in failure, Akiva's stance embodies a profound truth, that faith in redemption must not remain passive, that the covenant requires human striving as well as divine grace. His messianic hope was not naive but deeply rooted in his reading of Torah, his conviction that God's promises are real and that Jewish history is not random but teleological, moving toward fulfillment. The tragedy of the revolt does not erase his vision but testifies to the risks inherent in hope. To this day, his association with Bar Kokhba is remembered not as folly but as a sign of his unquenchable faith in Israel's destiny. The Agadic traditions about Rabbi Akiva serve to humanize his grandeur, portraying him as a man of humor, humility, and resilience. He is remembered as one who began his studies with children, who endured poverty with grace, who credited his wife for his success, who answered scoffers with parables, who laughed at ruins, who blessed suffering, who entered the mystical orchard, and returned in peace, who died with the Shema on his lips. These stories are not mere embellishments but vehicles of collective memory, transmitting his character to generations who never met him but felt his presence in their study halls. Through these narratives, Rabbi Akiva became not only a historical figure but a cultural archetype, embodying the ideals of perseverance, faith, and wisdom. The very multiplicity of stories reflects the impossibility of confining him to one role. He was at once scholar, mystic, patriot, husband, martyr, and teacher. The impact of Rabbi Akiva on subsequent Judaism cannot be overstated. Without his interpretive method, the Mishnah might never have taken its final form. Without his disciples, the chain of transmission might have been broken after the catastrophe of his 24,000 students' deaths. Without his canonization of texts, Jewish spirituality would lack some of its most cherished books. Without his martyrdom, Jewish memory would lack one of its most inspiring testimonies of fidelity. His legacy is woven into the very fabric of rabbinic Judaism, inseparable from its identity. To study Torah is to walk in his path, to argue law is to echo his voice, to hope for redemption is to share his vision, to endure suffering with faith is to live his teaching. Rabbi Akiva thus transcends his own time and place, becoming a perennial presence in Jewish life. The figure of Rabbi Akiva also invites reflection on the dynamic between personal transformation and communal destiny, for his story illustrates not only the possibility of individual renewal, but the way one life can alter the trajectory of an entire people. That he began his study at 40, a time when most considered learning already beyond reach, became a motif of hope for generations who feared that their own opportunities were gone. His rise demonstrated that renewal is always possible, that devotion can overcome the limits of circumstance. In him, the people of Israel found a living parable of resilience. Just as Akiva was able to turn his life from ignorance to wisdom, so too could Israel turn its fate from exile to redemption. His personal biography became communal metaphor, his struggles mirroring those of his nation, and his triumphs foreshadowing their own survival. The same resilience that carried him from shepherd to sage carried the Jewish people from ruin to continuity, and so his life and theirs became entwined in memory. One of the most striking aspects of Rabbi Akiva's teaching is his capacity to balance rigor with expansiveness, to uphold strict fidelity to law while simultaneously proclaiming universal principles of love and hope. This balance is evident in his treatment of capital punishment, where he is remembered as having said that a Sanhedrin that executed once in 70 years was considered destructive, and some traditions even suggest he sought to abolish the death penalty altogether by erecting procedural safeguards. Yet at the same time he insisted that judgment must be impartial, declaring that there is no pity in judgment. To modern eyes, these statements may seem contradictory, but in Akiva's vision they reflect a unity. The sanctity of life and the sanctity of law are not opposed but complementary, each requiring the other to prevent chaos and cruelty. In this dialectic we see his greatness as a jurist, for he could honor both the demands of justice and the demands of compassion, refusing to sacrifice one upon the altar of the other. His ethical worldview also extended into the realm of suffering. While some rabbis regarded suffering as punishment, Akiva at times framed it as an opportunity for deeper connection with God, a way of sharing in the destiny of Israel and participating in divine love. His ability to find meaning in pain did not trivialize it but transformed it into testimony, as in his final martyrdom when he declared that at last he could fulfill the commandment to love God with all his soul. This teaching has been both celebrated and wrestled with across centuries, for it offers solace in affliction, but also raises difficult questions about the value of suffering. Yet its endurance attests to its power. Many generations of Jews, enduring persecution and exile, have drawn strength from Rabbi Akiva's example, seeing in his steadfastness a mirror for their own endurance. Rabbi Akiva's role in shaping Jewish identity also included his rulings on ritual and purity, for he lived in an age when these laws, once tied to the temple, needed reinterpretation for a life without sacrifice. His careful distinctions in the realms of impurity, vows, marriage, and damages provided the scaffolding for a Judaism that could survive in diaspora, unmoored from its sacred center yet still bound by covenantal law. In this way, Akiva functioned as a bridge between the world of the temple and the world of rabbinic Judaism, ensuring continuity while fostering innovation. His interpretations did not merely preserve the past but redefined it, showing that Torah was not dependent on place or ritual alone but could be lived fully wherever Jews gathered to study and pray. His mystical sensibility, too, must be understood as part of this identity-shaping role. By affirming the holiness of Song of Songs and by surviving the journey into Pardes, he signaled that Judaism could embrace mystery without fear, that it could integrate mystical vision with halakhic fidelity. He neither rejected mysticism as dangerous nor allowed it to replace law. Instead, he harmonized them, showing that one could gaze into the deepest mysteries and return to daily duties with peace. This motto proved essential for later Jewish mystics, who often invoked Rabbi Akiva as a precedent for integrating ecstasy with discipline, vision with responsibility. His balance became a standard: mysticism without law risks dissolution, law without mysticism risks dryness, but together they yield a living faith. In considering his role as a national leader, it is important to recognize that Rabbi Akiva lived at a time when Jewish existence was under constant threat from Rome, and the yearning for redemption was more than a theological concept. It was a burning political and spiritual need. His endorsement of Bar Kokhba must be read in this context, not as naive misjudgment, but as a profound expression of hope in an era of despair. The Jewish people, humiliated and oppressed, longed for restoration, and Akiva's declaration that Bar Kokhba was the Messiah gave voice to this yearning. Though history proved the revolt disastrous, resulting in immense loss of life and the barring of Jews from Jerusalem, Akiva's stance reveals the depth of his solidarity with his people. He did not remain aloof in the study hall, detached from national suffering. He entered into their hope, shared their struggle, and ultimately shared their martyrdom. His messianic hope, though unfulfilled in his lifetime, kept alive the conviction that history has meaning and direction, that exile is not the final word. The image of Rabbi Akiva laughing at the ruins of the temple crystallizes this hope. Where others saw only destruction, he saw prophecy fulfilled and therefore redemption guaranteed. This capacity to reinterpret catastrophe as confirmation of divine faithfulness reflects his genius not only as a sage, but as a psychologist of the spirit, able to transform despair into confidence. It was not that he denied the pain of loss, but that he refused to let it define reality. For Akiva, reality was ultimately shaped by God's promises, and therefore every loss was also a signpost pointing toward future fulfillment. This outlook became one of the enduring legacies of rabbinic Judaism: the ability to find meaning in exile, to see history as a journey toward redemption even in its darkest moments. The death of his 24,000 students is another episode that reveals the moral depth of his teaching. Whether taken literally as a plague or symbolically as a reflection of the losses of the revolt, the tradition interprets it as punishment for their failure to honor one another. This conveys the lesson that Torah without respect is self-defeating, that knowledge without humility leads to destruction. Akiva, who rebuilt his academy with a small group of disciples after this devastation, demonstrated that the way forward was not in numbers or prestige, but in quality of character. Those few disciples, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, Rabbi Yos, Rabbi Yehuda, and Rabbi Nehemiah, became the pillars of the Mishnah, proving that integrity and humility matter more than multitude. The mourning customs of the Omer, observed by Jews to this day, keep alive the memory of this loss and the ethical warning it conveys, ensuring that Akiva's lesson continues to shape Jewish behavior across centuries. When we consider Rabbi Akiva's legacy as a teacher, it is essential to see how he fostered creativity among his disciples. He did not merely impose doctrines but cultivated minds capable of innovation. Rabbi Meir, known for his parables and brilliance, carried forward Akiva's interpretive daring. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, associated in later tradition with the Zohar and Kabbalah, embodied Akiva's mystical dimension. Rabbi Yehuda, who became the patriarch and redactor of the Mishnah, embodied Akiva's systematic vision. Each disciple reflects an aspect of the master, demonstrating how Akiva's spirit multiplied through diverse expressions. In this way, his legacy was not monolithic but multifaceted, ensuring that Judaism could develop along multiple paths while retaining a common root. The martyrdom of Rabbi Akiva, as preserved in rabbinic and liturgical memory, stands as one of the most powerful testimonies of faith in human history. His calm recitation of the Shema under torture has inspired countless Jews facing persecution, reminding them that fidelity to God is possible even in extremity. The image of his soul departing with the word one on his lips encapsulates his entire philosophy, that God's unity is the ultimate reality, transcending suffering and death. To remember him among the 10 martyrs is not only to mourn his death, but to affirm his teaching that the covenant endures beyond history's violence. His martyrdom sanctified not only his life but the entire enterprise of Torah, sealing it with blood and elevating it into eternal testimony. The influence of Rabbi Akiva upon Jewish thought after his death can scarcely be exaggerated, for even though he left no single authored work, his spirit pervades the Mishnah, the Talmud, and the entire rabbinic project. His students carried his methods into the academies of Israel and Babylonia, where his hermeneutic insistence that every letter of Torah matters became the foundation for generations of dialectical reasoning. The Midrash Halakha, particularly the Mekilta of Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, the Sifra on Leviticus, and the Sifri on Numbers and Deuteronomy, bear the imprint of his approach, emphasizing derivations from textual minutiae and crafting legal edifices upon particles and repetitions. Without his interpretive audacity, the Mishnah might have remained a simple compilation of laws, but with his spirit it became a living system, open to argument, expansion, and reconfiguration. His methods train the rabbinic imagination to see Torah not as static but as infinitely generative, a principle that still animates Jewish learning to this day. His role in the chain of tradition also links him directly to Rabbi Judah the Prince, the compiler of the Mishnah. Though Judah was not his direct disciple, he inherited Akiva's vision through Akiva's students, especially Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Thus, when Judah undertook the monumental task of redaction, he was working within the intellectual universe shaped by Akiva. In this sense, the Mishnah itself can be seen as one of Akiva's legacies. Even if indirectly, for without his interpretive system, his ethical maxims, and his insistence upon canon and continuity, there might have been no Mishnah at all. Every page of Talmud that builds upon the Mishnah is therefore also a monument to Rabbi Akiva, a testament to his vision that Torah could survive destruction and exile by taking root in the spoken and written word. Rabbi Akiva's thought also contributed to the shaping of Jewish mysticism, though in ways more subtle than explicit. The story of his entry into Pardes, where only he entered in peace and departed in peace, became a foundational myth for the mystical tradition. Later Kabbalists saw in him a model of one who could approach the divine mysteries without losing balance, who could ascend and descend without damage. His affirmation of the Song of Songs as the Holy of Holies provided scriptural justification for reading the erotic as mystical, sanctifying the language of desire as a metaphor for union with the divine. His disciple Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, later associated with the Zohar, carried forward this mystical current, and though the historical links are debated, the symbolic genealogy is clear. Akiva was remembered as the master who sanctioned the mystical path, who showed that it could be harmonized with halakhic fidelity. In this way, his presence continued to guide Jewish spirituality not only in law but in mystery. The ethical dimension of his legacy is preserved in numerous maxims attributed to him. Among them is the teaching in Pirkei Avot, "Beloved is man, for he was created in the image of God. An even greater love is that it was made known to him that he was created in the image. Beloved are Israel, for they are called children of God. An even greater love is that it was made known to them that they are called children of God. Beloved are Israel, for a precious vessel was given to them. An even greater love is that it was made known to them that the Torah was given to them." This layered affirmation reflects Akiva's vision of humanity, Israel, and Torah as concentric circles of love, each grounded in divine election and revelation. It is a teaching that affirms universal human dignity while also affirming Israel's particular covenant, a delicate balance that would continue to shape Jewish self-understanding. Another maxim, "Everything is foreseen, yet freedom of choice is given, and the world is judged by goodness, and everything depends on the abundance of deeds," reflects his philosophical depth, wrestling with divine omniscience and human freedom. In these aphorisms, we see not only a jurist but a thinker of profound theological and moral vision. Rabbi Akiva's life also illustrates the integration of marriage and scholarship, for his acknowledgement of Rachel as the foundation of his success models a partnership rare in antiquity. Her sacrifice, selling her hair to support him, enduring poverty, so he could study, became legendary, and his public tribute to her, telling his students that all that is mine and yours is hers, established a paradigm of gratitude and humility. In this, Akiva challenged cultural norms that often erased women's contributions, elevating Rachel into an enduring heroine of Jewish tradition. Their story has been retold in countless ways, each time affirming the principle that scholarship is not only the achievement of the scholar, but the fruit of shared sacrifice. For Jewish women across centuries, Rachel's role has been a source of inspiration, reminding them that their devotion, though often hidden, is central to the flourishing of Torah. The resilience of Rabbi Akiva in rebuilding after tragedy also speaks volumes about his leadership. After the loss of his 24,000 students, many would have despaired, but Akiva began anew with 5, and from those 5 the entire Mishnah tradition was secured. This capacity to begin again after devastation reflects not only personal strength, but a philosophy of history, that destruction is never final, that each ending conceals a new beginning. His example would be repeated in Jewish history many times, as communities rebuilt after expulsions, pogroms, and even the Holocaust, always drawing strength from the precedent of Akiva. In this sense, he became not only a sage of his own age, but a model of Jewish survival across all ages, embodying the capacity to transform ashes into foundations. His martyrdom finally sealed his teachings with ultimate testimony. By reciting the Shema while being flayed by Roman executioners, he enacted the commandment to love God with all one's soul in its most literal form. His students, witnessing this, asked how he could do it, and he answered that all his life he had wondered if he would have the chance to fulfill this verse, and now that the chance had come, he was grateful. This paradoxical gratitude in the face of agony exemplifies his philosophy, that devotion to God transcends circumstance, that the covenant is more real than suffering, and that death itself can be transformed into witness. His soul departing on the word one became the archetype of martyrdom, inspiring generations who face persecution to cling to faith even at the cost of life. In this moment, Akiva's life and teaching reached perfect unity, his words becoming his being, his philosophy becoming his flesh. The memory of Rabbi Akiva was kept alive not only in rabbinic texts, but in Jewish liturgy. He is remembered in the prayer of the 10 martyrs recited on Yom Kippur and Tisha B'Av, where his death is mourned alongside others who gave their lives for Torah. This liturgical remembrance ensured that his story was not confined to scholars, but entered the consciousness of the entire people, shaping their collective identity. To this day, his name evokes not only scholarship but sacrifice, not only law but love, not only past but future. His life has become a mirror in which Jews of every generation see their own struggles and hopes reflected, drawing strength from his perseverance and vision. To understand the magnitude of Rabbi Akiva's influence, it is important to place him in the broader historical and cultural context of his time. He lived during the transition from the Second Temple era to the age of rabbinic Judaism, a period marked by destruction, displacement, and the urgent need to reconstruct Jewish identity without the physical center of the temple. Many movements arose in response. The priestly Sadducees, who largely disappeared after the temple's fall. The sectarian groups like the Essenes, who had withdrawn earlier, the early Christians, who were defining their path, and the rabbis, who sought to anchor Jewish life in Torah and community. In this turbulent environment, Akiva emerged as one of the most creative and resilient figures, articulating a vision that enabled Judaism not only to survive but to flourish. His genius lay in recognizing that the temple, though lost, was not the sole vessel of holiness, and that Torah itself could become the portable sanctuary of Israel. By emphasizing the infinite meaning of the text and the centrality of study, he relocated sanctity into words and practices that no empire could destroy. Rome could burn Jerusalem, but it could not burn the letters of Torah engraved in the minds of disciples. Rabbi Akiva also represents a fusion of the personal and the cosmic. His own transformation from ignorance to wisdom parallels the transformation of Israel from defeat to renewal. Just as he began at 40 and became the greatest of sages, so too did Israel begin anew after 40 years of wandering in the desert, after 40 years of exile in Babylon, after the catastrophe of 70 CE. The motif of 40 recurs as a symbol of renewal through trial, and in Akiva's life it becomes literal. His story suggests that no matter how late or dire the hour, renewal is always possible, both for the individual and for the nation. This motif resonated profoundly with later Jewish history, providing hope whenever communities faced devastation. In Akiva, Jews saw a promise that even after destruction, life can begin again, wisdom can be found, sanctity can be rebuilt. His teaching that everything is given in pledge and a net is spread over all the living, the shop is open, the shopkeeper gives credit, the ledger is open, the hand writes, and all who wish to borrow may borrow, but the collectors make their rounds regularly every day. And the judgment is true, and all is prepared for the banquet encapsulates his vision of divine justice and human freedom. Life is portrayed as a marketplace where all are free to act, yet all actions are recorded and reckoned, and ultimately there is a banquet, a final fulfillment. This metaphor captures the balance between responsibility and grace. Humans are free, yet accountable. God is just, yet merciful. It is an image that conveys both seriousness and hope, reminding listeners that their deeds matter, but also that history is moving toward a consummation of joy. Such teachings reveal Akiva not only as a jurist but as a moral philosopher, one who grappled with questions of destiny, freedom, and meaning. The image of Akiva as a national leader is also shaped by his role in the Bar Kokhba revolt. Though the revolt ended in devastation, his support for it testifies to his unwillingness to separate Torah from the fate of the people. He could have remained a scholar removed from politics, but instead he aligned himself with the struggle for freedom. This alignment shows his understanding that Torah is not only about private piety but about the collective life of Israel, about their dignity and future as a people. To declare Bar Kokhba the Messiah was not merely a political endorsement but a theological statement. That redemption is real, that history has purpose, that God has not abandoned his people. Even in failure, this stance left an indelible mark, for it reminded Jews that their spiritual leaders were also their fellow sufferers, sharing in their risks and hopes. Akiva's martyrdom, coming in the aftermath of the revolt, thus symbolizes not only fidelity to Torah, but solidarity with Israel in their darkest hour. His hermeneutic principles also had long-term implications for Jewish law. By asserting that every detail of the text is meaningful, he enabled the expansion of halakha to address new situations, ensuring that the Torah remained relevant in changing contexts. This principle undergirds much of Talmudic reasoning, where seemingly trivial details become the basis for far-reaching laws. Without Akiva's boldness, rabbinic law might have become stagnant. With it, it became endlessly dynamic. His method also sanctified the act of study itself, for if every letter is a doorway to new meaning, then the process of interpretation is itself a sacred act. This understanding transformed study into a form of worship, a way of cleaving to God through the mind and lips. In this sense, Akiva helped shift Judaism from a religion centered on sacrifice to one centered on learning and prayer, a shift that made survival in exile possible. The Agadic portrayals of Akiva's humility further deepen his legacy. He is remembered as one who began by studying with children, sitting on the ground to learn the alphabet, enduring mockery but persisting until mastery. These stories convey not only his determination but his humility, his willingness to start from nothing and to admit ignorance. Such humility became a model for all students, reminding them that greatness begins with small steps, and that shame should never prevent learning. His story thus democratized study, encouraging even the most unlearned to begin. The fact that he became the teacher of the greatest sages from such beginnings made his story a parable of hope, endlessly retold in Jewish communities to inspire perseverance. Rabbi Akiva's balance of law and love is also reflected in his interpretation of Scripture. His famous teaching that the Torah's command to love one's neighbor is its great principle has often been contrasted with Rabbi Ishmael's assertion that these are the generations of Adam is the great principle, emphasizing the universal human family. But in fact, Akiva's view also affirms universality, for to love one's neighbor as oneself is to recognize the dignity of all human beings as bearers of God's image. His affirmation of this principle as central reflects his understanding that law without love is empty, that the ultimate goal of halakha is the cultivation of compassion. At the same time, his insistence on rigorous interpretation prevented love from devolving into mere sentimentality. For him, true love was expressed through action. The concrete practices of justice, charity, and mutual respect. This integration of law and love remains one of his enduring contributions to Jewish ethics. In the mystical dimension, Rabbi Akiva's survival of Pardes established a standard for safe mystical practice, that one must enter with preparation, humility, and grounding in halakha. The others who entered, Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, and Elisha ben Avuiah, represent the dangers of imbalance, obsession, madness, or heresy. Akiva's safe return shows that mystical vision can be integrated rather than destructive, that it can enrich rather than undermine faith. This story became a cautionary tale for later mystics, reminding them to anchor their visions in discipline and community. It also elevated Akiva as a model not only for jurists but for visionaries, one who could embrace the infinite without losing his grounding. In this way, he became a prototype of the scholar mystic, a figure who unites intellect and spirit. His martyrdom, finally, crystallizes all these elements: law, love, hope, mysticism, resilience. To die with the Shema on his lips is to affirm the unity of God in the face of fragmentation, to affirm love in the face of cruelty, to affirm hope in the face of despair, to affirm vision in the face of blindness. It is the ultimate integration of his life's teachings, the final proof that his philosophy was not abstract but embodied. His death became a symbol not only of loss but of triumph, a testimony that Rome could kill the body but not the soul, could silence the voice but not the teaching. To this day, his story is told not in tones of defeat but of inspiration, reminding Jews that fidelity to God transcends all suffering. The enduring influence of Rabbi Akiva can also be seen in the transmission of his methods and ideas across centuries. His disciples, each a master in their own right, carried forward the principles he embodied, ensuring that his intellectual and spiritual vision was not limited to his lifetime. Rabbi Meir, famed for his interpretive skill and parables, transmitted Akiva's analytical rigor and inventive reading of texts. Rabbi Shimon bar Yochai, whose mystical insight shaped the Zoharic tradition, carried forward Akiva's vision of the union of law and mysticism. Rabbi Yehuda, later the redactor of the Mishnah, codified a corpus of law that bore the imprint of Akiva's principles of interpretation and ethics. Through these disciples, Akiva's influence was multiplied and diversified, reaching every corner of Jewish life in Israel and Babylon. He thus established not only a school of thought but a living tradition, one in which inquiry, interpretation, and moral development remain central. His teachings also extended into the practical and ritual life of the Jewish people, shaping observance in profound ways. Akiva's detailed attention to law ensured that the smallest aspects of daily practice carried ethical and spiritual significance. From the laws of purity and vows to the obligations of Sabbath observance, marriage, and interpersonal conduct, his rulings combined precision with humanity, balancing the needs of society with the imperatives of conscience. For example, his insistence on honoring others' dignity even in legal matters reflects his core ethical vision, that law is not an end in itself but a means to cultivate justice, compassion, and communal cohesion. In this way, the lived experience of Jewish law became an embodiment of the principles he championed, linking the spiritual and the everyday in a seamless continuum. Akiva's integration of mystical sensibility into halakhic practice was also innovative. By emphasizing the significance of every letter and every crown in the Torah, he introduced a symbolic dimension to legal interpretation, suggesting that the sacred permeates even the smallest details of life. This approach legitimized a view of the world as infused with meaning and offered a template for later mystical traditions, including early Kabbalistic thought. The combination of textual rigor and mystical imagination allowed Judaism to accommodate the deepest spiritual experiences without abandoning the structural coherence of law. Akiva's balance between rational analysis and mystical insight thus became a model for generations of scholars who sought to navigate both the seen and unseen dimensions of divine reality. The ethical and spiritual dimensions of his teachings are further illustrated in his reflections on love, justice, and human responsibility. His famous declaration that you shall love your neighbor as yourself is not simply a moral ideal, but a structural principle for all Jewish life, linking ritual, law, and ethics. For Akiva, law without love is empty and love without law is directionless. This integration provides a template for ethical decision-making that remains influential, offering guidance for the moral dilemmas of both communal and personal life. Similarly, his insistence on humility, patience, and perseverance in the pursuit of knowledge reflects a philosophy in which character formation is inseparable from intellectual development. He taught that the cultivation of virtue and the pursuit of wisdom are mutually reinforcing, each enriching the other in a dynamic process that leads to holiness. Akiva's historical and cultural significance is magnified by the dramatic circumstances of his life. Living through the aftermath of the temple's destruction and the upheavals of Roman rule, he embodied the possibility of adaptation and resilience. His encouragement of hope, even amid devastation, provided a template for Jewish endurance, demonstrating that faith and study could sustain identity when political and physical security were absent. His support for Bar Kokhba, though historically fraught, reflected an unshakable belief in the capacity for divine and human collaboration to achieve redemption. Akiva's life, therefore, is a model not only of individual excellence but of collective aspiration, illustrating how scholarship, devotion, and courage can shape the destiny of an entire people. His relationship with Rachel further illuminates his personal and ethical dimensions. By acknowledging her sacrifice and elevating her contributions, he modeled a partnership in which shared commitment undergirds achievement. This recognition of the integral role of women in sustaining Torah learning was exceptional for his era and demonstrates Akiva's capacity for insight and justice beyond the purely intellectual realm. In celebrating Rachel's role, he affirmed that Torah is not pursued in isolation, but in community and mutual support, and that the sacred work of study is intertwined with the realities of human relationships. The narratives surrounding Rabbi Akiva's entry into Pardes and his survival of that mystical experience serve as a profound lesson in the interplay between spiritual aspiration and grounded practice. While others were consumed by the vision, Akiva returned unscathed, exemplifying a disciplined integration of mystical insight with ethical and halakhic responsibility. This story conveys a principle that would resonate in later mystical traditions, that the pursuit of divine knowledge requires preparation, balance, and humility, and that insight must be harnessed for the good of the community. Akiva's safe navigation of the Pardes thus becomes emblematic of his broader approach to life, engagement with the infinite tempered by wisdom, courage, and ethical grounding. Finally, his martyrdom encapsulates the unity of his life's teachings. To die reciting the Shema, affirming God's oneness at the very moment of extreme suffering, is the ultimate enactment of the commandment to love God with all one's soul. It embodies his ethical, mystical, and halakhic ideals: devotion to God, fidelity to Torah, courage in the face of persecution, and the integration of love, law, and hope. This final act transforms the narrative of Rabbi Akiva from biography into legend, from history into enduring symbol. His life and death together became a paradigm for Jewish existence, demonstrating that scholarship, devotion, resilience, and ethical commitment are inseparable, and that fidelity to Torah is both a personal and communal act with eternal resonance. Rabbi Akiva's legacy also includes the profound influence he had on the formation of Jewish liturgy and the communal expression of faith. While some traditions attribute the development of prayers such as the Kaddish to his era, even if not authored directly by him, the ethos he embodied, of sanctifying God's name through devotion, study, and ethical action, permeates these prayers. Kaddish, recited to elevate God's name and affirm faith in moments of grief, echoes Akiva's principle that holiness persists even amid suffering. In this sense, Akiva's life and teachings inform not only legal reasoning and mystical insight, but also the rhythm of daily and festival worship, the lived experience of Judaism across time. His insistence that Torah is life, and that devotion continues even when external circumstances are hostile, resonates through these liturgical forms, embedding his vision in the spiritual heartbeat of Jewish communities worldwide. The integration of Akiva's legal, ethical, and mystical teachings is further reflected in his approach to textual interpretation. He treated the Torah not merely as a set of rules, but as a living organism, with each word, letter, and punctuation mark imbued with potential meaning. His famous principle that no word is superfluous, no repetition meaningless, elevates even the smallest grammatical elements into avenues of ethical, legal, or mystical insight. This meticulous attention transformed the study of Torah into an art of infinite inquiry, where discovery is ongoing and each generation can uncover new depths. By doing so, Akiva not only preserved the continuity of the Jewish legal system, but also sanctified intellectual curiosity as a spiritual practice, teaching that the pursuit of knowledge itself is an act of devotion. Every debate, every textual nuance, every interpretive flourish in later Talmudic literature bears the imprint of Akiva's hermeneutic vision. His ethical contributions, moreover, were inseparable from his legal acumen. Akiva's insistence on love your neighbor as yourself as the central principle of Torah elevated interpersonal ethics to the forefront of religious life. Unlike a purely ritualistic or legalistic approach, Akiva emphasized that law is not merely to be obeyed but to cultivate relationships of justice, respect, and care. This principle reverberates through halakhic reasoning, reminding scholars and laypeople alike that fidelity to God manifests concretely in how one treats others. The tragic story of his 24,000 students who perished between Passover and Shavuot underscores this lesson. Scholarship divorced from ethical awareness leads to disaster, while ethical integrity ensures that learning nurtures life rather than destroys it. Through this, Akiva linked the abstract world of legal reasoning with the tangible realities of human conduct, creating a model for moral jurisprudence that remains foundational. Akiva's influence extends to Jewish mysticism in equally profound ways. The tale of his successful navigation of Pardes, where other sages faltered, symbolizes his ability to integrate spiritual insight with ethical and intellectual discipline. He demonstrates that mystical experience, when properly grounded, need not lead to madness or heresy but can enhance understanding and devotion. This story became a cornerstone for later mystical traditions, particularly Kabbalah, which emphasizes the interplay of law, meditation, and visionary experience. His affirmation of Song of Songs as the Holy of Holies further extends this mystical dimension, portraying love, both human and divine, as central to spiritual life. By recognizing the sacred in human emotion, Akiva paved the way for a vision of Jewish spirituality that embraces both intellect and feeling, law and devotion, reason and ecstasy. The historical and political dimensions of Akiva's life are equally instructive. His support for Bar Kokhba, recognizing him as Messiah, illustrates a bold integration of theological vision and national hope. While the revolt ultimately ended in tragedy, Akiva's willingness to invest faith and authority in the cause reflects his deep commitment to the destiny of Israel. He demonstrated that Torah is not only a guide for personal piety but a framework for communal life and collective aspiration. His alignment with Bar Kokhba underscores his belief that spiritual insight must be enacted in the world, that hope requires courage, and that faith is inseparable from action. Even in failure, this model of engaged leadership provides a lasting example of the integration of religious devotion with practical responsibility for the welfare of the people. Akiva's personal virtues further illuminate his teaching. His humility, demonstrated in beginning his studies with children despite ridicule, models the principle that greatness is not innate but cultivated through persistence, discipline, and respect for the learning process. His gratitude toward Rachel underscores the moral and relational dimension of his philosophy, emphasizing that achievement is rarely solitary and that partnership, support, and acknowledgement of others are integral to the cultivation of wisdom. These qualities, combined with his courage, ethical insight, and mystical vision, present a holistic model of the ideal sage, one whose intellect, heart, and spirit are aligned in the service of Torah, community, and God. The pedagogical legacy of Rabbi Akiva is perhaps as profound as his intellectual contributions. His method of cultivating disciples, encouraging independent reasoning, fostering creativity, and integrating ethical awareness with legal rigor, ensured that the next generation of sages could carry forward the work of Torah in diverse contexts. By emphasizing both fidelity to text and imaginative interpretation, he prepared his students to navigate the complexities of a post-temple world. The resulting proliferation of learning circles, academies, and textual commentaries throughout Israel and Babylonia can be traced to the methodological foundations he established. Through his disciples, Akiva's influence multiplied geometrically, ensuring that the principles he embodied would continue to shape Jewish thought for centuries. Even in death, Rabbi Akiva's presence remained formative. His martyrdom, commemorated in liturgy and memory, enshrines the integration of law, devotion, ethics, and national solidarity. The image of Akiva reciting the Shema as he was tortured exemplifies the ultimate expression of love of God with all one's soul, an ideal that integrates intellectual, emotional, ethical, and spiritual dimensions of religious life. This act of martyrdom transforms personal suffering into communal inspiration, linking memory and example, law and devotion, individual courage, and collective identity. It underscores the continuity of Torah through life, death, and historical challenge, illustrating that even the most extreme persecution cannot extinguish devotion when grounded in principle and love. Rabbi Akiva's enduring legacy is also visible in the ways his life and teaching shaped Jewish communal identity. In a time of political instability, social upheaval, and the trauma of the temple's destruction, he provided a model for sustaining faith and culture without reliance on physical centers of worship. By rooting holiness in Torah study, ethical conduct, and communal learning, he established the foundation for a Judaism capable of flourishing in diaspora. Communities could gather to study, debate, and pray, creating sanctity through collective engagement rather than proximity to the temple. This decentralization, far from weakening Jewish identity, allowed it to become resilient, adaptive, and enduring. Akiva's vision thus transformed the cultural and spiritual infrastructure of Judaism, ensuring continuity under conditions that might have otherwise led to fragmentation or despair. His interpretive approach further reinforced this communal resilience. By insisting that every letter and every word of Torah contained meaning, Akiva democratized study, giving every learner access to the infinite depth of divine wisdom. The smallest observation could yield significant insight, allowing scholars of varying abilities to contribute meaningfully to the discourse. This principle encouraged rigorous debate while maintaining a shared reverence for the text, creating a dynamic yet cohesive intellectual community. The Talmudic tradition of argumentation and multiplicity of opinions owes much to this foundational perspective, and in it Akiva's voice resonates through centuries, teaching that interpretation is both a personal and collective enterprise. Ethically, Akiva's insistence on love, humility, and respect for others established moral principles that remain central to Jewish thought. By emphasizing that Torah cannot exist without ethical application, he linked law directly to human conduct, demonstrating that ritual and legal observance are inseparable from justice and compassion. His lessons on interpersonal respect, reflected in the tragic fate of his 24,000 students, underscore the consequences of neglecting these principles. Through these teachings, he instilled a vision of Judaism in which scholarship is inseparable from moral integrity, where intellectual achievement is measured not only by insight but by the impact it has on communal life. Rabbi Akiva's mystical insights complement his ethical and legal contributions. His survival of the journey into Pardes illustrates the balance necessary to approach divine mystery without succumbing to destructive forces. This story became a cautionary and aspirational tale for future mystics, emphasizing preparation, humility, and ethical grounding as prerequisites for mystical experience. Akiva's affirmation of Song of Songs as the Holy of Holies similarly integrates mystical love with communal and ethical dimensions. He sanctified human emotion, particularly love, as a reflection of divine reality, creating a theological and spiritual framework in which human passion and divine devotion are intertwined. In this, Akiva established the template for later mystical traditions that sought to harmonize the transcendence of God with the intimacy of human experience. The pedagogical methods of Rabbi Akiva also ensured the transmission of his vision across generations. By fostering creativity, encouraging critical thinking, and nurturing ethical awareness in his disciples, he created a lineage of scholars capable of sustaining and expanding his teachings. His approach emphasized not rote memorization, but active engagement with the text, ethical reflection, and practical application. The success of his students, who became pillars of the Mishnah and later Talmud, reflects the effectiveness of this pedagogy. It demonstrates that true learning is generative. It empowers students to innovate while maintaining fidelity to the tradition, creating a living, evolving, and resilient culture of study. Akiva's personal virtues, particularly humility and gratitude, further illuminate his teachings. His acknowledgement of Rachel's sacrifices, his readiness to begin studies from the basics despite ridicule, and his perseverance under extreme hardship all model qualities essential to moral and spiritual development. These traits ensure that his example is not merely intellectual but profoundly human. Akiva demonstrates that greatness is achieved through persistence, ethical sensitivity, and relational awareness, and that intellectual mastery is meaningless without these qualities. In this sense, his life is a holistic guide. It integrates mind, heart, and spirit in the pursuit of holiness. Historically, Akiva's endorsement of Bar Kokhba reflects the tension between messianic hope and pragmatic reality. While the revolt ended tragically, his willingness to invest hope in a national deliverance illustrates his deep engagement with the collective destiny of Israel. He exemplifies a vision in which faith and action are intertwined, showing that Torah is not a purely private or contemplative pursuit but a framework for participating in history and shaping the world. Even when human efforts fail, Akiva's perspective affirms that divine promise remains operative, that hope persists, and that faithful engagement with the world is never futile. This integration of faith, action, and hope remains a guiding principle for Jewish leaders and communities throughout history. Akiva's martyrdom crystallizes the synthesis of all these dimensions. By reciting the Shema at the moment of his death, he enacts the ultimate commitment to God, transforming ethical, intellectual, mystical, and national ideals into lived experience. This act becomes a paradigm of fidelity and courage, demonstrating that devotion to God transcends circumstance, and that the human spirit can affirm divine unity even in the face of extreme suffering. His martyrdom ensures that his life is not only remembered but actively inspires, providing a model for endurance, ethical action, and spiritual resilience. It elevates Akiva from historical figure to enduring symbol, whose teachings continue to guide both personal and communal life. Finally, Rabbi Akiva's influence persists in contemporary Jewish thought and practice. His methods of interpretation, his ethical teachings, and his mystical insights continue to be studied and applied across diverse communities. From the study halls of traditional yeshivot to modern scholarly discourse, from ethical reflection to mystical meditation, Akiva's vision resonates with a timeless relevance. He demonstrates that scholarship, devotion, ethics, and hope are mutually reinforcing, and that a life committed to Torah can sustain both the individual and the collective. Through the interplay of intellect, morality, and spirituality, Rabbi Akiva provides a model for living a life of integrity, courage, and enduring faith. In reflecting upon Rabbi Akiva's life as a whole, one is struck by the remarkable integration of personal transformation, intellectual achievement, ethical rigor, mystical insight, and national commitment. His biography is not merely a chronological recounting of events, but a narrative of profound spiritual evolution. From an unlettered shepherd who began studying Torah at the age of 40, he became the master of the greatest sages, demonstrating that human potential is boundless when guided by devotion, discipline, and perseverance. This transformation underscores a fundamental principle in Akiva's life, that growth is possible at any stage, that the pursuit of wisdom and holiness is always open to those willing to devote themselves fully. In his life story, generations of Jews find inspiration and hope, seeing in his example the possibility of redemption not only for the individual but for the people as a whole. Akiva's intellectual contributions, particularly his hermeneutical methods, transformed the study of Torah into a dynamic, interpretive, and deeply ethical enterprise. By insisting that every letter, word, and repetition in the Torah carries meaning, he elevated the act of study to a sacred practice. His methods encourage careful attention, rigorous reasoning, and creative interpretation, ensuring that Torah would remain relevant across time, place, and circumstance. These principles became foundational for the Mishnah and Talmud, shaping the dialectical methods that underpin rabbinic discourse. His insistence on the inseparability of law and ethics, on the integration of legal reasoning with moral responsibility, created a framework for a Judaism in which intellectual rigor and compassionate action are mutually reinforcing. In this way, Akiva's contributions were not merely theoretical but lived, guiding the daily practice, moral awareness, and spiritual imagination of Jewish communities for centuries. Ethically, Rabbi Akiva's teaching that love your neighbor as yourself serves as the cornerstone of his moral vision. For him, law without love is empty and love without law is directionless. This principle integrates ritual observance, legal practice, and interpersonal conduct into a coherent ethical framework. His insistence on respect for others, humility in learning, and attention to communal welfare demonstrates a holistic approach to moral life. The tragic fate of his 24,000 students, interpreted as punishment for failing to honor one another, serves as a vivid reminder of the consequences of neglecting ethical responsibility, reinforcing the centrality of love, respect, and communal care in Torah observance. Through these teachings, Akiva ensures that the pursuit of knowledge is inseparable from the cultivation of virtue, creating a model of scholarship grounded in moral integrity. His mystical sensibility complements and deepens his ethical and legal contributions. The story of his entrance into Pardes, surviving where others faltered, illustrates the integration of spiritual vision with ethical and intellectual discipline. This narrative became a guiding paradigm for later mystics, emphasizing preparation, humility, and grounding in law as prerequisites for engaging with the divine mysteries. Similarly, his defense of Song of Songs as the Holy of Holies sanctified human love as a reflection of divine reality, establishing a theological framework in which human emotion and divine devotion are intertwined. In these ways, Akiva harmonized rational, ethical, and mystical dimensions, providing a holistic model for spiritual life in which intellect, heart, and soul are united in pursuit of holiness. The national dimension of Rabbi Akiva's life is equally significant. His support of Bar Kokhba, though historically tragic, reflects a profound engagement with the collective destiny of Israel. He exemplifies a vision in which faith is inseparable from action, where spiritual devotion encompasses concern for communal survival and aspiration. Akiva's willingness to align with the hopes and struggles of his people demonstrates that Torah is not a purely private pursuit but a framework for shaping history and destiny. Even when human efforts faltered, his faith in God's promise remained unshaken, modeling resilience, courage, and hope in the face of adversity. His martyrdom further amplifies this message. By dying with the Shema on his lips, he affirms that fidelity to God and to Torah transcends suffering, offering an enduring example of courage and devotion that continues to inspire countless generations. Pedagogically, Rabbi Akiva's influence is profound. He cultivated disciples not by dictating answers, but by fostering critical thinking, ethical sensitivity, and interpretive creativity. His students, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Shimon Bar Yache, Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Nehemiah, and Rabbi Yos, each reflect aspects of his genius, carrying forward his intellectual, ethical, and mystical legacy. Through their achievements, the foundations of the Mishnah and Talmud were solidified, ensuring that Akiva's vision would not only survive but flourish. His pedagogical method demonstrates that teaching is not merely the transmission of information, but the cultivation of character, insight, and responsibility, a model that remains relevant in education across disciplines and cultures. Akiva's personal virtues, including humility, gratitude, and perseverance, reinforce the holistic nature of his example. His recognition of Rachel's sacrifices, his readiness to begin study from the basics despite ridicule, and his perseverance under extreme hardship provide a moral and spiritual template. These qualities demonstrate that true greatness integrates intellect, ethics, relational awareness, and courage. In Akiva's life, learning is inseparable from moral action, and scholarship is inseparable from humility and service. This integrated vision offers a model not only for scholars, but for all who seek to live a life of meaning, balance, and devotion. In contemporary Jewish life, Rabbi Akiva remains a central figure. His teachings continue to inform legal interpretation, ethical reflection, mystical exploration, pedagogy, and communal practice. From the study halls of traditional yeshivot to modern scholarly inquiry, from ethical guidance to mystical meditation, his principles resonate with enduring relevance. He demonstrates that intellectual pursuit, ethical conduct, mystical insight, and communal responsibility are mutually reinforcing, offering a model for holistic spiritual life. His life and death, his teachings and martyrdom, continue to inspire, providing a paradigm for fidelity, resilience, and hope that transcends time and circumstance. Ultimately, Rabbi Akiva embodies the integration of law, ethics, mysticism, pedagogy, and communal engagement. His life demonstrates that human potential is boundless when guided by devotion, discipline, and love, that Torah is a living, dynamic, and generative reality, that scholarship and morality are inseparable, and that hope and courage can endure even in the face of destruction. From his humble beginnings to his rise as the master of sages, from his interpretations of Torah to his mystical insights, from his ethical teachings to his martyrdom, Rabbi Akiva provides a comprehensive model for Jewish life. He exemplifies the unity of mind, heart, and spirit, showing that devotion to God encompasses thought, action, and love. In this holistic vision, Rabbi Akiva's legacy remains not only foundational for Judaism, but also inspiring for humanity as a whole, a testament to the enduring power of faith, wisdom, and ethical courage. To explore Rabbi Akiva's legal contributions more closely, one must examine how his approach transformed halakhic reasoning. He demonstrated an extraordinary ability to derive law from textual minutiae, treating each word, letter, and even the smallest repetition as a potential source of meaning. For example, his method of interpreting the doubling of words or the presence of seemingly superfluous letters enabled the creation of nuanced legal principles that could adapt to changing circumstances. In matters of vows and purity, Akiva emphasized both strict adherence to the law and sensitivity to human circumstances, showing that justice requires attention to both principle and context. His rulings on ritual law reflect a careful balance. He maintained fidelity to tradition while demonstrating flexibility and creativity, ensuring that Torah remained applicable even after the destruction of the temple and the dispersion of the Jewish people. This innovative method of exegesis underpins much of the Mishnah and Talmud, and his influence is seen in how later sages debated legal matters, relying upon both his textual sensitivity and his ethical grounding. Akiva's Agadic teachings further illuminate his ethical and spiritual vision. Through stories, parables, and moral exhortations, he communicated profound lessons on humility, perseverance, and love. One famous teaching relates to the creation of humanity in the divine image. Akiva emphasizes that knowledge of this fact is more than intellectual, it carries ethical weight, instructing the learner to treat every human being with dignity. Another Agadic narrative recounts his reaction to tragedy. Upon witnessing destruction and loss, he interprets these events not merely as punishment but as opportunities to perceive the unfolding of divine providence. This approach provides a lens through which suffering, exile, and catastrophe can be understood as part of a larger, divinely ordered process, blending hope and realism. Through such narratives, Akiva educates not only in law but in the art of living, teaching that insight, morality, and resilience are inseparable. The mystical dimensions of Akiva's teachings are equally profound. His journey into Paradise, for example, is interpreted not simply as a historical event, but as a paradigmatic allegory for engaging with divine mysteries. Each figure in the story, Ben Azai, Ben Zoma, Elisha ben Avuiah, and Akiva himself, represents a different approach to spiritual pursuit, curiosity, daring, imbalance, and disciplined integration. Akiva's success illustrates the necessary combination of preparation, humility, and ethical grounding for safely approaching mystical experience. Moreover, his mystical reading of Song of Songs imbues the text with layered meanings. Love, desire, and relational intimacy are symbols of the soul's longing for God, suggesting that human emotion is a sacred conduit to divine connection. This integration of the mystical with ethical and legal insight sets Akiva apart from his contemporaries and provides a model for later Kabbalistic thought, which often seeks to balance esoteric vision with halakhic and ethical responsibility. The historical context of Rabbi Akiva's life further enhances the understanding of his genius. Living under Roman occupation, witnessing the destruction of Jerusalem, and experiencing the turbulence of the Bar Kokhba revolt, he operated in an environment of constant threat and uncertainty. That he achieved such intellectual, spiritual, and moral heights under these conditions is remarkable. His alignment with Bar Kokhba demonstrates his belief in active engagement with the fate of Israel, showing that spiritual vision is incomplete without participation in communal destiny. Even when human efforts failed, his faith remained unshaken, modeling resilience and hope for subsequent generations. The tragic martyrdom of his students underscores the stakes of scholarship and ethical conduct. Knowledge divorced from relational sensitivity and humility leads to catastrophe, reinforcing the integration of law, ethics, and spiritual responsibility. In his pedagogy, Akiva's personal life also provides insight into his philosophy. His late start in Torah study, coupled with the support of Rachel, illustrates the importance of relational foundations in personal growth. Rachel's sacrifices enabled him to pursue learning, and his acknowledgement of her role demonstrates humility, gratitude, and the ethical recognition of partnership. This emphasis on relational ethics complements his legal and mystical insights, creating a holistic vision in which human relationships are central to the cultivation of wisdom and holiness. By elevating Rachel's contributions, Akiva challenges the notion that greatness is solely individual, showing instead that achievement is embedded in community, mutual support, and ethical acknowledgement. In addition, Rabbi Akiva's pedagogical approach exemplifies a method of nurturing wisdom that is both rigorous and inspiring. He encouraged his students to question, debate, and explore diverse interpretations while maintaining fidelity to core principles. This approach allowed innovation within tradition, ensuring that Torah study remained dynamic rather than static. His disciples' success in codifying the Mishnah and contributing to the Talmud reflects the effectiveness of this pedagogy. They inherited not merely knowledge but a framework for lifelong inquiry, ethical deliberation, and spiritual engagement. Akiva thus created a living, evolving intellectual tradition capable of sustaining Jewish identity through centuries of exile and persecution. Moreover, his martyrdom serves as the ultimate synthesis of his teachings. By reciting the Shema while facing execution, Akiva demonstrates the inseparability of law, love of God, courage, and moral integrity. This act is not only a personal testament, but a communal symbol. It sanctifies Torah, validates ethical and spiritual striving, and inspires resilience among future generations. His death reinforces the principle that the pursuit of holiness entails risk, sacrifice, and unwavering commitment, showing that life's ultimate meaning is found not in ease or comfort but in fidelity to God and ethical principles. The synthesis of Rabbi Akiva's life, teachings, and influence offers a model for all dimensions of Jewish existence. His intellectual rigor, ethical sensitivity, mystical insight, pedagogical vision, relational awareness, and national commitment create an integrated paradigm, one that demonstrates how study, devotion, and action reinforce each other. His approach teaches that Torah is not a static text, but a dynamic, living enterprise, that scholarship is inseparable from virtue, that mystical insight requires grounding in law and ethics, and that personal transformation contributes to communal and historical renewal. In these ways, Akiva's life continues to resonate across centuries, offering guidance for spiritual, ethical, and intellectual engagement in all contexts. Even contemporary Jewish thought reflects Akiva's enduring influence. Modern scholarship, ethical discourse, and mystical exploration all bear traces of his interpretive methods, his ethical principles, and his visionary synthesis of law and spirituality. From the study halls of traditional yeshivot to philosophical reflection on Torah, his influence is unmistakable. By modeling integration of intellect, morality, mysticism, and communal responsibility, Akiva provides a timeless example of how a life committed to learning, virtue, and devotion can shape both individual and collective destiny. His life demonstrates that the pursuit of holiness is simultaneously personal, intellectual, ethical, mystical, and communal, and that fidelity to God and Torah remains the ultimate guide through adversity, uncertainty, and transformation. In conclusion, Rabbi Akiva stands as a central figure in Jewish history, whose life and teachings continue to inspire, instruct, and guide. His integration of law, ethics, mysticism, pedagogy, personal virtue, and national engagement provides a model for holistic religious and spiritual life. From humble beginnings to the heights of scholarship, from mystical vision to ethical practice, from personal devotion to communal solidarity, Akiva embodies the full spectrum of what it means to live a life dedicated to God and Torah. His teachings continue to shape the study, practice, and imagination of Jewish communities across time, offering a blueprint for enduring faith, courage, and wisdom. In every generation, Rabbi Akiva's life serves as a testament to the transformative power of devotion, the sanctity of study, the integration of knowledge and love, and the enduring hope of redemption for individuals and for the people of Israel. His story remains a living testament that human potential is limitless when guided by devotion, that law and love are inseparable, that mysticism and ethics can coexist, and that the ultimate purpose of life is to manifest God's unity through thought, action, and heart.